Hi, welcome to my session. My name is Dr. Betsy Donlin. I am an assistant professor at Aquinas College in Nashville, Tennessee. And this session is meeting students' needs through guided reading groups. So we will be beginning in prayer. We'll be talking about what is guided reading, what is our purpose with guided reading groups, and the different steps in a guided reading session, how to get started with guided reading, and tips and tricks for how to lead your students through guided reading groups. So let us begin in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, your spirit of wisdom fills the earth and teaches us your ways. Look upon these teachers. Let them strive to share their knowledge with gentle patience and endeavor always to bring the truth to eager minds. Grant that they may follow Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I invite you to just reflect on this passage from the Gospel of St. Luke and think about what it means for us as teachers and how we see our students as individuals. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 small coins? Yet not one of them has escaped the notice of God. Even the hairs of your head have all been counted. Do not be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. As we're talking about guided reading groups and we're looking at all the different steps to a guided reading session and the ways that teachers can prepare, I want us to keep in mind what our mission is as Catholic educators and how we see our students and what it means to honor their dignity, not just in the words that we use or how we act as teachers, but in our actual teaching strategies, that we honor their dignity through differentiation, that we lead them to effective reading strategies to be lifelong readers because we care about them as individuals. So if you scan this QR code, it will take you to the handout for our presentation today. And there are some interactive parts of our session. So please pause or whatever you need to do to scan for the handout, because there will be some stop and jots throughout the session. So what is guided reading? The 3 pictures at the bottom of this slide are 3 experts in guided reading that you may or may not already know about. On the left is Fountas and Pinnell. In the middle is Jan Richardson, and on the right is Jen Jones. So many pieces of this session today are coming from these 3 experts in the field, but there's also some other resources I'll be sharing with you. But I encourage you, if you have each of these books or any research or writings from any of these experts, to really dive deep in implementing their strategies. So this quote from Fountas and Pinnell: in guided reading, you meet students where they are and lead them forward with intention and precision. That's where we're focusing today. Sometimes we think we're doing guided reading groups by reading with small groups of students, and that may be true or it may not be true. So as we're looking at the details of how to set up guided reading according to students' instructional level, we can kind of self-reflect. Where am I as a teacher in leading guided reading groups with my students, and where can I improve? So in guided reading, teachers can support students directly as they read. It leads to students reading independently. So in a guided reading session, your students are developing strategies so that they are equipped to read increasingly complex text. What we're hoping in the guided reading session is they have a small amount of time with you as you are supporting them reading aloud, and they're able to apply the strategies that they've learned in the guided reading session to other texts that they read independently. In a guided reading session, students should experience success. They should begin to enjoy reading. If at any point during a guided reading session you feel that students are not experiencing success or enjoying the time, that's a moment of reflection for us as teachers. Do I need to reassess, reevaluate which group this child is in, or think of another structure for this guided reading group in a way that will increase the child's motivation and help lead them to where they need to be? In guided reading, It provides teachers with ongoing opportunities for observation and formative assessment. While you are assessing during guided reading sessions, it's not the main purpose. The main purpose is truly to support students reading independently, teaching them strategies, and helping them to make meaning from text. So in guided reading, we are teaching skills and strategies in the context of a book. The teacher supports the students, small group of students, reading text at their instructional level with 90 to 94% accuracy. Guided reading provides a context for responsive teaching. It is grounded in the teacher's knowledge of and respect for each student. We'll talk about this more later, but before even setting up guided reading in your classroom, you will want to get to know your readers, where their reading levels are, what their interests are, what kind of skills and strategies they're already excelling with reading, and where they need to grow. I love this quote by Jen Jones that every skill taught in isolation is called skill practice. Every skill taught in the context of a book is called reading. So I'm not here to speak anything negative about the workbooks that come along with our basal readers and our different reading curriculums. But I am here to say that in guided reading, we know we're teaching skills within the context of a book. And as Jen Jones is saying, that is called reading. So just a reminder, we're probably all familiar with this, but because it's really, really important that students are working at their instructional level during guided reading, a reminder of the 3 levels of readability. So at a child's independent level, they can read a text with 95 to 100% accuracy. And the purpose of reading text at an independent level is to build fluency. That's not where we're focusing today, but it's another important part of the literacy picture for a student. At a child's instructional level, where you are working with guided reading, that is when the child can read a text with 90 to 94% accuracy, and they will need your support to be successful in doing so. And at a child's frustration level, that is when the accuracy is less than 90%. In guided reading, students are supported. They're given the supports they need to think like proficient readers and can read more challenging texts. A little bit later in our session, we'll be talking about how you introduce a guided reading session. And a lot of teachers use the phrasing good readers blank. And in the blank, you're inserting what strategy we're focusing on today. So that little snippet of time where the teacher at the beginning of the guided reading session is reminding students what strategy we're working on today, then students are applying it as they read the text aloud. They're supported during their own reading and afterwards in a discussion, and then supported also in either word work or writing work. For all of those reasons, that is why this middle bullet point is there, that guided reading gives you the most instructional bang for your buck. That this is a time during your day that you can feel proud of as a teacher, that you can know, I took what I know about my students and I pushed them to go to that next level. As a reminder, students can move levels and groups as they gain skills, so they will not remain in the same guided reading group all year. The next few slides are an example for you of what it looks like when a text is at varying levels of accuracy for a child. So this would be at the frustration level at 85% accuracy. And you can tell that if a child attempted to read this text with all these blanks, it would be really difficult to understand the text and be able to draw meaning from what they're reading. This is at 90% accuracy, where we want to be for a guided reading group. You as teacher will not be able to teach all of those blanks, all of the words that are missing, but you can pick 1 or 2 strategies to focus on with the child to help them with their comprehension. This is at 95% accuracy, where a child might be reading a text independently. And then this, I just put the 100% accuracy for you to be able to see all of the words that are in that little snippet. Okay, on your handout, you will have this chart also. So we're just looking at some possible misconceptions around guided reading, what it is and what it is not. Guided reading is using leveled reading materials. It does not have to be leveled readers, but it often is. But you can do guided reading with any text, any picture book or chapter book. So guided reading is using leveled reading materials to support readers at an instructional level, as we talked about, that 90 to 94% accuracy level. Guided reading is not working with groups of students using the same text for each group, regardless of reading level. So sometimes this can happen that we have a whole class read aloud, and then we split students into reading groups, and the teacher works with small groups, but they're all reading the exact same text. So that would not be called guided reading. It's small group reading, and it could be beneficial for another purpose. But for this session today, we're focusing on guided reading. So guided reading is working with students with a common need. You're thinking through what are those skills and strategies that they need a little support with. And this group of students all needs to work on this one area. Maybe it's something like summarizing or looking at character development within a text, and you're supporting them during that short session. Guided reading is not reading texts that are too easy or too hard. This is probably, I think, one of the most difficult pieces, is making sure the text you've selected for your guided reading session is at that instructional level for each child in that small group. Guided reading is modeling what good readers do. These are some examples here on the chart: predicting, clarifying, questioning, and summarizing. It is not asking the student to read without establishing a purpose or making connections to the reader's experience. So it isn't just arranging your classroom into small groups and letting students read. There's intentionality with the teacher explicitly saying, this is the strategy we're working on today. Guided reading is shifting groups often by reassessing the strategies and comprehension. We're not only looking at how are they doing with making predictions, we're also looking at how are they able to talk about the text they just read. Guided reading is not leaving the groups the same all year, as we already have spoken about. And guided reading is developing independent readers and coaching in those real-time moments. It is not using round robin reading. What is the purpose of guided reading? This is also part of your handout. So we cannot assume that just giving children access to good books is going to be all they need to be good readers. They need interaction of text reading and guidance from their teacher. They need to enjoy reading, even if it's challenging for them. They need opportunities to problem solve while reading. What do I do when I get to a tricky word? They need to learn strategies they can apply to their reading of other texts. They need to be able to talk about what they read and make connections between texts. The purpose of guided reading is to help students to read for meaning. So the different elements of guided reading, this is what the teacher is doing before, during, and after the reading, and then what students are doing before, during, and after. The teacher obviously is selecting the text, the instructional level. They're preparing the introduction. This is the one sentence statement about what strategy we're working on today. Brief introduction of the story, leaving some questions to be answered through the reading. During the reading, the teacher is simply listening in, validating reading strategies, like I noticed that you did this, and individually assist when appropriate. I would say no more than once or twice. The teacher is also making notes about what strategies students are using. After the reading, teacher will talk about the story with the students and return to the text for one teaching moment. And let me emphasize, we are only doing one teaching moment in a guided reading session because we're keeping it as short as possible. Students, before the reading, are engaging in conversation about the story, what they think it will be like, raising questions and noticing information. During the reading, they're reading the whole text quietly. They're asking for help with strategies if needed. And after the reading, talking about the story, reacting personally to the story, and then revisiting the text during that teaching moment. So where do I begin? Obviously, you need to figure out what level your readers, approximately what level you have your readers. So once you have that information, you're able to select text, analyze text for complexity. Then during the session, introduce the text, allow the students to read and support them if needed. After the reading, discuss the meaning of the text, make one teaching point, and after that teaching point, you may have some possible word work or writing about reading, depending on your time. So how to select books for guided reading. Some schools already have guided reading level readers in the classrooms ready to go. But like I said, you can use any text for guided reading. So these are just some ideas. Of course, with any type of literacy, you need a variety and lots of different levels. But you want to ask yourself about the text. Is the plot interesting? Does the text provide opportunities for students to use what they know? Does it provide opportunities to problem solve? And do the illustrations extend the meaning of the text? And is the length of the text appropriate for the level of the students? I also teach children's lit, so I would love for you all to reach out if you have any questions or want some book suggestions. But I'm leaving out some of those elements right now from this session just for the sake of time. But obviously, we won't always want to choose children's literature that leads our students to what is true, good, and beautiful. So again, with selecting books for guided reading, you can choose text that would fit your teaching point for that guided reading group. So if you're wanting them to work on making connections, you could read The Relatives Came by Cynthia Rylant. If they're making inferences, Crickwing by Janelle Cannon. If they're summarizing, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. If they're visualizing, Charlotte's Web. If you scan the QR code on this slide, you can pause to scan, and it will take you to this document by Jan Richardson of ways that you can informally assess your students during guided reading sessions, looking at behaviors to notice, teach, and support at each guided reading level. I put some examples here for levels A, B, and C, but you can see that it's basically a checklist of when your students have shown that they can successfully do this skill or strategy, then you make a check and move on to the next one. Just a note about book levels and reading levels, as we're about to look at those on the next couple of slides. I love this quote by Kate DiCamillo, that reading should not be presented to children as a chore, a duty. It should be offered as a gift. And we want to always keep that in mind, that if it starts to feel like this is more of a chore for our students, return back to motivation. What is it that's interesting to the student? So a book on level that holds no interest to a child will be much less enjoyable than a book that speaks to a child, that power of motivation. So we never want to let a book's level or a reading level define a child. And our overall goal is the child's love of reading. So I put on there, remember these other important reading numbers in a child's life, like the number of books at a child's bedside table, the number of visits to the library, the number of hours spent reading aloud, and the number of times a child asks a question about what was read. That's just where we want to be with our mindset as we're looking at this. So these are the guided reading levels and approximate grade levels with example books. And all of these resources will be available to you. These are the guided reading levels paired with the Lexile levels of the text and approximate grade level. So now we'll be looking at the structure of a guided reading session. There are some other blanks on your handout that you can fill out during this time. But basically, you're going to be starting with familiar reading, moving into some sort of brief fluency work, making your teaching point. Then the students engage in the new text reading, picture, walk, and talk, your coaching, and then you have the discussion all together, the new text retelling, and the word work or possible writing. So for your introduction, keep it simple. The goal is to get students interested and provide a framework for meaning of the text. So it can be something as simple as the book we are reading is called Going Camping. It's about a dad and his son going camping. So we keep it just very, very simple and brief for students. We're not front loading or pre-teaching vocabulary. You may do a picture walk during this time and lead students to ask themselves, what do I think the author will teach me? What words do I think will be in the book? So introducing the strategy, remember you're just picking one of these for a guided reading session and usually using the framework of good readers blank. So good readers, if you're working on summarizing, good readers tell what's important. Good readers use what I already know to help understand something new. Good readers make connections between different things I read. Good readers ask questions to understand what I'm reading. Good readers create a movie in my mind while I'm reading. Good readers figure out what it really means from clues in the text. Good readers make judgments about what I read and explain why. Good readers put the pieces together to see them in a new way. This is one example of what you as teacher might bring to a guided reading session in terms of objectives and looking at where each child is. So this is similar to the handout with the QR code about behaviors to notice, teach, and support. So if you just look at the third one, I can explain the main idea of a short text in a few sentences. So if you chose to review that during the guided reading session, and then you had a student who was able to do it after they read their text, then you could just initial in that blank that was taught that day. It's a way to keep data during the guided reading time. For the new text reading, you want to stagger the passing out of the book so the students are beginning at different paces. As soon as they get their book, they need to start reading. They're going to be reading the text on their own. It's not round robin. And you can use whisper phones so they can hear themselves and self-monitor. So emerging readers might say something like, "The White House is galloping to town," but when they hear themselves read it out loud, they catch that it doesn't make sense. And you tell your students, you are reading it for your ears, not my ears. So you want them using a quiet voice. It's not really a whisper voice because they're not making the sounds in their throat. So you can tell students it's like a caterpillar voice that you can feel the words in your throat, but you're not speaking at full volume. So again, during the actual reading of the text, the teacher's number one job is just to listen in. But if you do have one or two teaching moments with a child, like coaching, or if they look at you like they need help, and this is what Jen Jones says, that if they look at you when they get to a tricky word, they have no strategies. So it's not necessarily negative, it's just information for us that they need more strategies in their toolkit. What do I do when I get to a tricky word? So some things you can say are try something, or did that work, or is that right? And I put 9 strategies that you can suggest for students or teach them over time, and have them verbalize which strategy they are using. So did the strategy of looking at the picture work for you? So you're reinforcing, you expect them to use the strategies, and you want them to also be aware, I use the strategy and it helped me to be a better reader. More ideas for prompting during that student read aloud time of the guided reading session. So depending on what you're working on, these are just different questions that you can ask students. And different reading strategies you may be working on at each level. So for early emergent readers, and this is also on your handout, they may be simply identifying title, author, and illustrator. You may want them to connect to prior knowledge. What do you know about this topic? Elicit strategies. What do good readers do? And then after reading, ask them to retell what happened in the story. For emergent or beginning readers, these are some more strategies. They may be learning how to make predictions, using strategies for tricky words or unknown words, like looking at the pictures, skip and come back, find chunks I know. And after reading, reflect on the strategies they use, retell the story, sequence the events, and they may start to talk about the characters and setting. For early fluent readers, you're starting to talk about genre. You want to think, as you're reading, what do I know so far? Does it make sense? Did I guess what would happen? So they're verifying their predictions. And you can ask students to tell you what they are thinking while they're reading. Up until this point, before they're early fluent, they may not be ready to talk while reading. They're focused more on just decoding the words and making meaning from what they have. And you can use a story map at this level to show the different parts of the story and ask students to make those text-to-self connections. And reading strategies for fluent readers, these are some for word recognition. If you get to a tricky word, you can find word parts that you don't know, look for the compound words, try the word and ask, does it look right? Does it sound right? Does it make sense? You could also use a dictionary. And some strategies for comprehension. Again, we're looking at genre, text type, visualize what you're reading, look for the different text features if it's nonfiction text or fiction text. And then after reading, we're summarizing, we're thinking about author's purpose and point of view, and organizing what you learned from that text in a graphic organizer. For coaching, depending on what errors your students are making, these are just a reminder. If you're doing running records, you may be familiar with this terminology also with MSV. So meaning errors, it's when a student might say something like, I see a rat, or the text says, I see a rat, and the child says, I see a mouse. A structure error is when the child might say, he is helping a hard time instead of he is having a hard time. And visual errors, they might be saying something like, we pack our sleep bags in tents. So they're just missing the end of that word. Examples of feedback that you can give during a guided reading session. So you might say something like, I really liked the way you grouped those words together to make your reading sound phrase. Did it help you understand what you read? Or if you're kind of correcting what they read, can you go back and reread this sentence? I want you to look carefully at the whole word here, beginning, middle, and end. What do you notice? So you're helping either praise what strategies were used or helping them see that there needed to be a strategy to help them be more successful. Remember that students in guided reading groups are working at their instructional level, so they may make 5 to 8 mistakes for every 100 words. You will not reteach all 5 to 8 words. You're just picking 1 or 2 to coach to help for next time. More prompts that you might ask during the reading, and these are more for the comprehension. What are we noticing? What are we thinking about the author's tone or the reason that they wrote this text? Does this remind you of another text? What are you noticing about this character? And then after reading, the discussion. So you want to plan ahead what questions you will ask, and you want both lower level and higher level questions. And text-based evidence is an instructional expectation. You want your students to go back to the text to answer any questions that you may ask. So this is one of Jen Jones' resources that she has of what you can have at your guided reading table to remind students of what you expect in terms of text-based evidence. So there's a little poster on her website, Are You a Text Talker? And it gives these sentence stems to remind students, this is how we return back to the text when we form our answers. So we would say things like, on page 25, the author said, according to the text, in the text it said, an example on page 25 is, so we're giving them kind of those supports. This is where you want to get started to reinforce that. I want you going back to the text, not just closing it at the end and discussing without looking back. And then after the discussion, you may do word study. So there's some examples here. If you're working on initial consonants, you can select 2 letter sounds and write those letters on a whiteboard, and then give the students 3 or 4 pictures that have those initial letters. Say the pictures, say the first sound, name the letter, place it under the correct consonant. You can also, if you're working on blends, you could select 2 or 3 blends that begin with the same letter and write those on the whiteboard. And then have the students say the picture, like swing, sound the first part, and say the letters of the blend, placing the picture under the correct blend. Here's some examples for working on initial consonants, beginning with at and making the word bat, or making a big word. So you're giving students the magnetic letters and using the letters to make words. We're looking at an example now, how you might do a lesson plan for a guided reading session. So this is just a guided reading text at level E, making pizza. This might be what your lesson plan would look like. So we know it's nonfiction. On the left is around how many minutes we would use for this guided reading session. So we have 3 minutes of familiar reading where students are rereading familiar books from past guided reading sessions. So that is when the teacher is getting the rest of the class settled in some sort of authentic task so that you're going to be free to work with the guided reading group. Then you'll spend 2 minutes on fluency work. It might be flash reading of high frequency words. Then 1 minute of a reminder of our mini lesson strategy. When we look at the title and the cover page, we can learn what the book is going to teach us. Then we're going 8 minutes with our new text reading. So the introduction might be, in the book, a mother and her daughter show us how to make a pizza. Then you listen in on students as they read and you coach them individually. You take 5 minutes for discussion of the text so you can see all the planned questions to ask during that discussion. 2 minutes for a retelling. Turn to your neighbor and say, this book is about blank and it teaches about blank. And then some examples for what you could do for word work or writing work. So classroom management during guided reading. The other students should be engaged in meaningful work. You want to try to avoid busy work, but obviously want to make it clear that you can't really be disturbed during this time. And if you begin this at the August or September, the beginning of the year, students will understand that's the procedure. So different ideas of what students can do who are not part of the guided reading session. They can listen to a story in the listening center. They can read a book silently and respond in their journals. They can do partner reading. They can go to ABC Center for letter and word study, Art Center, Writing Center, reading around the room. You can plan ahead for these items, but the biggest, most important part is just making it clear that you can't be disturbed during the guided reading time. Just to show how guided reading evolves over time. So from around ages 2 to 7, depending on where they are developmentally, emergent readers, during the guided reading session, the teacher prompts the children to use pictures and language. When they move to early reading stage, the students can independently read the whole book, solving difficulties with little help from the teacher. When they move to transitional reading, students independently read the whole book and the introduction is shorter. And by the time they get to 1st through 3rd grade, students are independently reading the whole book. New text features are introduced, and they may discuss characters or setting or may write after reading. In guided reading with chapter books, similar setup. It may evolve depending on what your students need, but you can discuss theme or setting, author's mood, author's purpose, the tone of the text. You can make a chart of major characters and their different traits and characteristics. You can look at figurative language. You can work on comprehension strategies, parts of speech, text structure, or point of view. Just a reminder of your role as teacher. So this is from the Congregation for Catholic Education, the document, A Religious Dimension of Education in a Catholic School. So the quote is, the teachers love their students and they show this love in the way they interact with them. They take advantage of every opportunity to encourage and strengthen them in those areas which will help to achieve the goals of the educational process. Their words, their witness, their encouragement and help, their advice and friendly correction are all important in achieving these goals, which must always be understood to include academic achievement, moral behavior, and a religious dimension. So as I said at the beginning, it's important for us to remember that who we are as Catholic educators, we are unique. We have a calling. It is our mission, not only to lead our students to be lifelong readers, but to think about them as individuals who are formed in the image and likeness of God. And that should inform our practice as professional educators. So in a reflection and summary of guided reading, every teacher has their own way of doing guided reading, and you may have the opportunity to observe other teachers in your building, and you can learn depending on where their students are and their reading levels and their interests. Guided reading might look different. So keep in mind that guided reading should be the most successful part of a child's day. It should not be stressful. It should be very enjoyable and exciting for the child when their name is on the guided reading session. Preparation is key. You want to have your materials ready to go and use assessment. It can be informal assessment, running records, or other assessments to change up the groups based on students' needs and how they're growing. Guided reading groups are not fixed ability groups. So this quote by St. Francis de Sales, we must never undervalue any person. God is present everywhere and every person is his work. And this really shines in guided reading as we're looking at students as individuals, giving them the skills and strategies they need to grow. So reflect in your handout at the close of this session about ways that you can either begin incorporating more guided reading groups in your classroom or enhance the groups that you are already leading. This is my contact information with my email. I would love to hear from you. I love guided reading and would love to give more strategies and support. And like I said, I also teach children's literature, so I'd love to give any book suggestions that you're looking for. Thank you so much for coming to my session, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.